Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this new nighttime journey. Settle in comfortably, adjust your pillows, and let your shoulders relax completely. Tonight, we travel to 1970s Los Angeles, where Lieutenant Columbo, with his rumpled raincoat and ever-present cigar, will discover that a secret buried for 30 years refuses to stay hidden, a story where the past always catches up with the present, where lies accumulate like layers of dust, and where a seemingly absent-minded but brilliantly perceptive detective will unravel a crime everyone thought was perfect. Thank you for being here with us tonight in this soothing darkness. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like to help us continue creating these stories that lull you to sleep. And most importantly, leave us a comment to tell us what you thought of this story, or suggest a detective or character you'd like to hear about in our future tales. Now, breathe deeply, close your eyes if you wish, breathe, and let yourself be swept away to sun-drenched Los Angeles, where Columbo will solve his most personal case. The Los Angeles sun shone with that particular late afternoon intensity, transforming the Hollywood hills into a golden silhouette against a deep blue sky. Richard Callow's villa stood majestically on one of those hills, a modern structure of glass and steel that seemed to float above the city. It was the kind of house that screamed success, power, money. The kind of house that belonged to a man who had it all. Richard Callow was exactly that kind of man. At 58, he was at the peak of his career as a Hollywood producer. His films had won Oscars. His charity galas attracted the biggest stars. His name was synonymous with excellence and prestige in an industry that forgave nothing and forgot everything. But that evening, in his immaculate villa overlooking all of Los Angeles, Richard Callow was dead. Lieutenant Columbo arrived on the scene about 2 hours after the body was discovered. His old Peugeot convertible looked completely out of place among the luxury cars parked in front of the villa. Mercedes, Jaguars, a Rolls-Royce. He got out of his car with slow, slightly awkward movements, wearing his rumpled beige raincoat despite the heat of the Californian evening. His grey hair was tousled, and he held a half-smoked cigar between his fingers. Lieutenant Columbo, a young uniformed officer, approached, trying to hide his surprise at the legendary detective's neglected appearance. "I'm Officer Martinez. Glad you're here, sir. This is a big case." Yeah, I heard," Columbo said in his characteristic drawl. He looked around with the air of a lost tourist. "Nice house? Very nice. How much do you think a house like this costs these days?" "Several million, probably." Mr. Callow was very rich. "Several million. Several million. Incredible." Columbo shook his head as if he couldn't understand such a sum. "All right, where's the body?" Officer Martinez led him through the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, modern artworks on the walls, designer furniture that probably cost more than Columbo's annual salary. Everything was perfect, immaculate, arranged with the taste and unlimited budget of a man accustomed to luxury. Richard Callow lay in his office, a spacious room on the first floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sparkling city below. He was slumped in his leather chair behind his massive walnut desk, his head tilted back, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling without seeing it. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit and a silk tie. At first glance, you might have thought he had simply fallen asleep at work. But the overturned glass of cognac on the desk and the slight foam at the corner of his mouth told a different story. "The coroner says it's poisoning," Martinez said. "Probably cyanide in the cognac. Fast death, a few minutes at most after ingestion." Columbo moved slowly toward the desk, his eyes seemingly distracted, but in reality recording every detail. He touched nothing, content to look, to lightly sniff the air, to mentally note the position of each object. Who found him? His personal secretary, a Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. She's worked for him for 30 years. She came tonight around 7 p.m. to bring him documents to sign. She found him like this and immediately called 911. 30 years, Columbo repeated thoughtfully. That's a long loyalty. Where is she now? In the living room. You want to talk to her? In a minute. Let me just look around a bit here. Columbo slowly circled the desk, his hands in the pockets of his rumpled raincoat. On the desk, next to the overturned glass, there was an open file, He leaned in to read without touching. Financial documents, contracts, nothing particularly interesting at first glance, but there was also a photograph partially hidden under the papers. "You mind?" Columbo asked Martinez, who nodded. Carefully, using a pen so as not to contaminate potential fingerprints. Columbo moved the papers to reveal the entire photo. It was an old black and white picture, yellowed with time. It showed 4 young men in their 20s, arms linked, smiling at the camera. They wore 1940s close-pleated trousers, open collar shirts, stylishly tilted hats. "Old friends, I guess," Columbo murmured. He studied the faces. One of them was clearly a young Richard Callow. The features were recognizable even through the decades, but the other 3 were strangers. "That's curious," Columbo said more to himself than to Martinez. Why would he have this old photo on his desk? It must have meant something to him. He noticed something else. On the back of the photo, partially visible, there was writing in faded ink. Columbo squinted to read. "The Four Musketeers, Hollywood, 1945. 1945, Columbo murmured. "That's more than 30 years ago." He straightened and looked around the office. The shelves were filled with awards, Oscars, Golden Globes, commemorative plaques. Framed photographs showed Callow with various celebrities over the years. But nowhere were there any other photos of these 4 musketeers. "All right, let's go see this secretary," Columbo finally said. Eleanor Hartley sat stiff as a poker on a white modern sofa in the living room. She was a woman of about 60, elegantly dressed in a pearl grey suit, her white hair arranged in an impeccable bun. She held a handkerchief in her gloved hands, but her eyes were dry. No tears, just a fixed, distant stare. "Mrs. Hartley," Columbo said, approaching with his gentle, slightly awkward manner. "I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'm very sorry for your loss. I know you've worked with Mr. Callow for a very long time." Eleanor raised her eyes to him. Her face was pale but composed. 32 years, Lieutenant. I've been his secretary since he started his own production company in 1945. 1945, Columbo repeated, mentally noting the coincidence with the date on the photo. "That was just after the war, wasn't it?" "Yes. Richard, Mr. Wall, wasn't it?" "Yes. Richard, Mr. Wall." Callow had returned from military service. He and his friends had big dreams for Hollywood. His friends? You mean the other men in that photo in his office? The 4 musketeers? Columbo said, watching her closely. "Yes," she said, visibly tense. That was their little group. 4 young men full of ambition. What happened to them? To the other 3, I mean, Columbo added. A long silence. Eleanor crumpled her handkerchief between her fingers. "They're all dead, Lieutenant. A long time ago." "All 3? "Yes. Accidents. It was tragic, truly." Richard was the only survivor of the 4. Columbo slowly nodded. His eyes narrowed in that expression he had when something didn't quite fit. "Mrs. Hartley, can you tell me what happened tonight when you arrived?" Eleanor took a deep breath, reassembling her professional calm. "I arrived around 7 p.m. As I told Mr. Callow this morning, I had contracts that required his urgent signature. I have my own key to the house. Mr. Callow trusted me completely. I came in. I called out, but he didn't answer. I went up to the office and found him like that, dead." "You didn't touch anything?" "No. Well, I checked his pulse, but he was already cold. Dead for at least an hour, I thought." "And you immediately called the police?" "Yes, immediately." Columbo pulled out his rumpled notepad and small pencil, the accessories he always carried. "Mrs. Hartley, forgive my question, but do you know if Mr. Callow had enemies? Someone who would have wanted to hurt him?" Eleanor hesitated. "Mr. Callow was a powerful man in this industry, Lieutenant. Powerful men always make enemies. But someone who would want to kill him, I can't imagine who." Columbo scribbled something in his notepad. "And that photo of the 4 musketeers, why do you think it was on his desk tonight? Did he always keep it there?" "No," Eleanor said, and now there was a note of tension in her voice. That photo was normally in a drawer of his desk. I don't know why he took it out today. Interesting. Columbo tapped his pencil against his teeth. You know, Mrs. Hartley, there's something that bothers me a little. You said the 3 other men in that photo are all dead. 3 close friends, all dead in accidents. That's a lot of bad luck for a small group, don't you think? Eleanor didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and measured. Life is full of tragedy, Lieutenant, especially in Hollywood. Columbo looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, ma'am, you're right. Well, I think that's all for now, but I'll probably have more questions for you. Will you be available? Of course, Lieutenant. I want to help in any way possible. After Eleanor left, escorted by an officer who would take her formal statement, Columbo returned to the office where the body was still in place. Waiting for the coroner to arrive with his team, he stood in front of the window, looking at the lights of Los Angeles shimmering in the falling night, his unlit cigar between his fingers. Officer Martinez joined him. What do you think, Lieutenant? A suicide. A suicide. A suicide. A suicide. Columbo turned, looking surprised. No, I don't think so. Look at the cognac glass. If he'd killed himself, he would have drunk the whole glass at once to make sure he ingested enough poison. But here, the glass is half full and overturned. That suggests he took a sip, realized something was wrong, and knocked the glass over in distress. No, it's murder. Someone put poison in his cognac. But who had access to his office? To his house? Good question. Columbo returned to the desk and examined the cognac bottle again. A Remy Martin Lewis, probably several $1,000s a bottle. The bottle is almost full, so the poison was probably only in the glass, not in the whole bottle. Which means the murderer was here in this room today, probably a few hours before Eleanor found the body. How do you know he died a few hours ago? Eleanor said he was already cold when she found him at 7. Cyanide kills quickly, but the body takes time to cool. I'd say he died between 4 and 5 this afternoon. Martinez checked his notes. According to the butler we questioned, Mr. Callow was alone in the house this afternoon. The butler and the other staff had the afternoon off. Apparently that was the arrangement every Thursday. So the murderer knew Callow would be alone, Columbo said thoughtfully. That narrows down the possibilities. It had to be someone who knew his routine, someone close to him. He looked again at the old photo of the 4 musketeers, 4 young men full of dreams and ambition in 1945. And now, 32 years later, all dead. The first 3 by accident, and the last poisoned in his own home. You know, Columbo said slowly, I think this story was meant to stay secret. Whatever the story of these 4 men is, someone didn't want it told. And Richard Callow died because he was about to reveal it. How do you know that? I don't know it, not yet, but that's what the little details are telling me. He taps the photo with his pencil. This photo was in a drawer. Eleanor said so, but today, Callow took it out. Why? Maybe because he was thinking about something, someone, a secret he'd kept for over 30 years. He turned to Martinez. I'm going to need everything you can find on the 3 other men in that photo. Their names, how they died, everything. And I want to talk to anyone who knew Callow in the 1940s. There's a story here, and I'm going to find it. And dear listeners, that is how this investigation begins. One that will plunge Columbo into the buried secrets of old Hollywood, 4 friends, a mysterious pact, and 3 decades of lies. What was Richard Callow about to reveal? Who had enough to lose to kill him? And what terrible secret did the 4 musketeers keep all those years? Stay with us, because Columbo will soon discover that some secrets refuse to stay buried. Don't forget to leave a like and share your theories in the comments. The next morning, Columbo showed up at the Los Angeles Archives office. It was a gray, bureaucratic building, filled with endless rows of filing cabinets and the smell of old paper and dust. A middle-aged librarian with glasses on a chain helped him find newspapers from 1945 to 1950. Are you looking for something in particular, Lieutenant? She asked, guiding him to a table with a microfiche reader. Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for information on deaths, accidents involving 3 men in the 1940s. I don't know their full names, just that they were associated with Richard Callow, the Hollywood producer. Oh, Mr. Callow. I heard about his death on the news this morning. Terrible tragedy. He was so talented. Yes, ma'am. Very tragic. Columbo spent the next 4 hours scrolling through microfiche. His eyes narrowed at the glowing screen, an unlit cigar dangling from his mouth. It was tedious work, but Columbo was patient. Impatience never caught murderers. Patience, attention to detail, perseverance, that was what solved crimes. Finally, around noon, he found something. An article from the Los Angeles Times dated March 23, 1946. TRAG, Death of Ewing 100 Turlerwood producer. Tommy Bradford, 24. A promising young film producer, died last night in a car accident on Mulholland Drive. Authorities report that Mr. Bradford lost control of his vehicle on a curve and plunged into a ravine. He died instantly. Mr. Bradford was known in Hollywood circles as a rising talent, having recently co-founded a small production company with several associates including Richard Callow and James Whitmore. He is survived by his parents and an inconsolable fiancé. Columbo carefully noted the names: Thomas Bradford, Richard Callow, James Whitmore. He kept searching. 2 months later, in the Times of May 15, 1946, mysterious drowning at Santa Monica. James Whitmore, 25, film producer, was found drowned on Santa Monica Beach early this morning. Witnesses report having seen Mr. Whitmore swimming alone late at night despite choppy seas. His body was discovered by a couple of morning walkers. This is the second tragic death in 2 months among the group of young producers who had formed Callow Bradford Productions. Mr. Whitmore is survived by his young wife, Margaret. Columbo frowned. 2 deaths in 2 months. It was starting to look like a pattern rather than coincidence. He searched further, and in August 1946, he found the third fatal fire in West Hollywood apartment. Robert Bobby Chen, 23, screenwriter and associate producer, died in a fire that destroyed his West Hollywood apartment on Sunday night. Firefighters stated the blaze was likely caused by an improperly extinguished cigarette. Mr. Gaud Shen, the last surviving member of the tragically cursed group of producers known as the Four Musketeers, now joins his associates Thomas Bradford and James Whitmore in an untimely death. Only Richard Callow remains of the original group. Columbo leaned back in his chair, letting the information settle. 3 men, all dead within 5 months in 1946. A car crash, a drowning, a fire, all ruled accidents. And Richard Callow, the only survivor, had become one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood. That's too much coincidence, Columbo murmured to himself. Way too much. He carefully copied the articles, thanked the librarian, and returned to his car. But instead of going back to the precinct, he headed to an address in a quiet neighborhood of Pasadena. The address belonged to Margaret Whitmore, the widow of James Whitmore, according to the phone directory. She still lived there after all these years. Columbo parked in front of a pretty Spanish colonial-style house with a well-kept garden and rang the doorbell. A woman in her 60s opened the door. Silver hair neatly styled, a simple but elegant dress. She must have been very beautiful in her youth, and even now, past 60, she wore that faded beauty with grace. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Lieutenant Columbo, LAPD. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. Margaret Whitmore looked at him suspiciously. About what, Lieutenant? About your late husband, Bam, and about Richard Callow. Margaret's face hardened. I have nothing to say about Richard Callow. Please, ma'am, it's important. Mr. Marden. Callow was murdered the night before last. Margaret blinked, shocked. Murdered? Yes, ma'am. Poisoned in his own home. And I think his death might be connected to something that happened a long time ago. Something involving your husband and the 2 other men in the group of 4 musketeers. Margaret remained silent for a long moment, then sighed and opened the door wider. You'd better come in, Lieutenant. Margaret's living room was comfortable and welcoming, filled with the memories of a long life. Framed photos covered the walls and surfaces. Children, grandchildren, family moments captured across decades. But Columbo noticed there was only one photo of James Whitmore placed on the mantelpiece. "You remarried?" Columbo asked, settling into an armchair. "Yes, 5 years after James died. My second husband Robert died 2 years ago. A good man. Not like..." She stopped. "Not like James." Margaret looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Lieutenant, what exactly do you know about my first husband and his friends?" "Not much, ma'am. That's why I'm here. I know he was part of a group called the Four Musketeers. I know they all had ambitions in Hollywood. And I know 3 of them died within 5 months in 1946, all under circumstances that were ruled accidental." "But you don't think they were accidents?" "No, ma'am, I don't. Not after what I've seen." Margaret stood and went to an old cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled out a wooden cigar box and brought it to Columbo. "James kept his personal papers in this box. After his death, I kept everything, even though I never looked at it. I guess I was afraid of what I might find." Columbo opened the box. Inside were letters, photos, newspaper clippings. He took out one letter and began to read. It was a letter from James to Margaret, dated February 1946. "My dearest Margaret, I have to talk to you about something that weighs on me terribly. Something terrible happened, and I don't know what to do. Tommy is dead. You already know that part, but what you don't know is that his death may not have been an accident. All 4 of us did something horrible in 1945, just after we returned from the war, something we swore we would never speak about. But Tommy had regrets. He wanted to confess. Richard couldn't let him do it. Too much at stake. Too much to lose. I can't write the details in this letter. It's too dangerous. But I want you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Richard is capable of anything to protect his future. Bobby and I are starting to be afraid. I love you more than anything in the world. Always yours." James Columbo read and reread the letter several times. "Mrs. Umberis, Whitmore, you received this letter?" "Yes. It arrived a week before James drowned. I thought he was paranoid, stressed by Tommy's death. But then," her voice broke, "then James died too, and I knew the letter was telling the truth. Why didn't you go to the police?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "Go to the police, Lieutenant. It was 1946. I was a young widow with no resources, accusing one of Hollywood's rising producers of murder. Who would have believed me? And I was afraid. Afraid that if I spoke, I'd end up dead too. So you stayed silent for more than 30 years. Yes, I lived with this secret my whole life. And now you tell me Richard is dead. Maybe there is justice after all." Columbo pulled out his notepad. Miss Whitmore, in this letter your husband mentioned something terrible that the 4 men did in 1945. Do you have any idea what it was?" "No. James never gave details, but it must have been serious. Serious enough that Richard would kill to keep it secret. And Bobby died about 3 months after James. A fire in his apartment. Another accident." Margaret shook her head. "Richard killed them all, Lieutenant. He killed them all to protect their secret, and he lived with it for 30 years, becoming rich and famous on their graves." Columbo thought for a moment. "Ma'am, please think very carefully. Is there anything else your husband might have told you? Any clue about what they did?" Margaret closed her eyes, remembering. There was one thing. One night, just a few days before he died, James was drunk. He talked in his sleep. He said a name over and over. "Sarah. Poor Sarah. We never should have." "Sarah?" Columbo said. "Who is Sarah?" "I don't know. I asked him the next morning, but he said I must have dreamed it, that he didn't know any Sarah." Columbo carefully wrote down the name. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I keep this box and its contents? They're potential evidence. Keep it, Lieutenant. If it can help you find the truth, then I'll be glad. I've waited more than 30 years for justice to be done. Walking back to his car, Columbo held the cigar box against his chest. Sarah. Who was Sarah? And what had the Four Musketeers done to her in 1945? It was time to go back to Eleanor Hartley. After 32 years as Richard Callow's secretary, she had to know things, many things. The question was, would she be willing to share them? Columbo found Eleanor in Callow's former office, organizing papers and personal effects. She wore a black suit today, appropriate for morning. Mrs. Hartley, Columbo said as he entered, his rumpled raincoat over his arm. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a few more questions. Eleanor looked up, her face showing fatigue. Lieutenant, of course. How can I help? Well, ma'am, I found something interesting today. It seems Mr. Callow had 3 business associates in 1945. Thomas Bradford, James Whitmore, and Robert Chen. They formed a group they called the Four Musketeers. Do you remember them? Eleanor turned pale. Yes, I remember them. They all died a long time ago. Yes, all dead in 1946, in circumstances that some people might call suspicious. Columbo sat down in an armchair without being invited. Mrs. Hartley, you started working for Mr. Callow in 1945, didn't you? Just after he returned from the war. Yes, that's correct. So you were there when those 3 associates died. You must have known them well. I knew them. Yes, they were good men. Their deaths were tragic. Columbo took out his notepad. Mrs. Hartley, let me ask you a direct question. Did you think those deaths were really accidents? A long silence. Eleanor turned to look out the window, avoiding Columbo's eyes. I don't know, Lieutenant. It was so long ago. But you had doubts. I can see it in your face. Eleanor suddenly turned back, her eyes bright with held-back tears. What do you want me to say, Lieutenant? That I suspected my employer of 32 years of being a murderer? Yes, I had doubts. Yes, I wondered how 3 healthy young men could all die accidentally in so little time. But I had no proof. Just suspicion. Why did you stay? If you thought he killed his friends, why keep working for him? Because. Eleanor stopped, struggling with something. Because I was young and needed the job. Because Richard was charming and treated me well. And because I hoped I was wrong. I wanted to believe they really were accidents. But you didn't really believe it? No, she admitted softly. I didn't really believe it. Columbo leaned forward. Mrs. Hartley, have you ever heard of a woman named Sarah? Someone who would have been important to those 4 men in 1945. Eleanor's face went white as a sheet. Sarah, she whispered. How do you know that name? So you knew her? Yes, Sarah Monroe. Eleanor sank heavily into an armchair. She was an actress. A beautiful beginner with extraordinary talent. The 4 men met her at a party in August 1945. They all fell in love with her. What happened to her? Eleanor closed her eyes. She died, Lieutenant. She died in September 1945. Officially, it was suicide. She threw herself off a cliff near Malibu. Officially, Columbo repeated. But you don't think it was suicide? No. I think the 4 Musketeers knew something about her death. I think they were involved. And I think that's the secret Richard protected all these years, by killing anyone who threatened to reveal it. And dear listeners, the mystery deepens. A young actress dead in 1945, 4 men who all loved her, and a secret so terrible it led to 4 murders across 3 decades. But who was Sarah Monroe really? How did she die? And most of all, who killed Richard Callow? And why now, after so many years? Stay with us, because Columbo is about to discover that the story that was meant to stay secret is far darker than he ever imagined. Don't forget to subscribe and share your theories about what really happened in 1945. The next day, Columbo went to the Vital Records archives to look up Sarah Monroe's death file. It was another afternoon spent in dusty offices, but Columbo never complained about tedious work. As he often said, details win cases. Sarah Monroe's death certificate was filed as suicide, fall from a cliff. Date, September 15, 1945. Location, Point Dume, Malibu. Age at death, 22. There had been no thorough autopsy. In the 1940s, suicides generally weren't investigated deeply, especially when the victim was a young woman in an industry known for its drama. But there was something interesting in the police report. The person who discovered the body was a fisherman named Miguel Santos, and according to the notes, Santos told the officers he had seen people on the cliff the night before the body was found. Columbo wrote down the name, a potential eyewitness after 32 years. Unlikely but worth checking, a search in the directory revealed that Miguel Santos still lived in the Malibu area. Columbo drove to a small house near the beach, where a man in his late 60s was mending a fishing net in his garage. Mr. Santos, Lieutenant Columbo, LAPD. I was wondering if I could talk to you about an incident that happened in 1945. Santos looked up, squinting into the sun. 1945. Holy God, that was a long time ago. What is it about? A young woman named Sarah Monroe. You found her body at the bottom of a cliff at Point Dume. Santos grew serious. Ah yes, I remember. Such a beautiful young girl. Terrible tragedy. In your report to the police, you mentioned seeing people on the cliff the night before. Can you tell me about that? Santos set down his net and wiped his hands on his pants. It was late at night, maybe 11. I was coming back from night fishing. I looked toward the cliff, Point Dume, the high cliff near the lighthouse. And I saw several people up there. It was dark, but there was moonlight that night, so I could see their silhouettes. How many people? 4 or 5, I'd say. They seemed to be arguing. I heard raised voices carried by the wind, but I couldn't make out the words. Can you describe them? Not really. Like I said, it was dark. But I think there was at least one woman. I heard a sharp scream at one point, and the others seemed to be men. And then? Columbo asked. Santos frowned, remembering. Then I kept going home. I was tired and just wanted to get back. The next morning, I went back out to fish and found the girl's body at the foot of the cliff. I called the police right away. Did you tell the police what you'd seen the night before? Yes, I told them, but they said it was probably just young people partying on the cliff. They said the girl probably killed herself later, after everyone left. They didn't seem to think it was important. Columbo slowly nodded. Mr. Santos, thank you very much. You've been very helpful. Walking back to his car, Columbo thought. 4 or 5 people on the cliff. An argument. A scream. And the next day, Sarah Monroe was dead at the bottom of that same cliff. The 4 musketeers were 4 men. Add Sarah, that made 5 people. Exactly what Santos had seen. So they were all there that night. They had all witnessed what happened, or more likely they had all participated. And then, one by one, when they threatened to reveal the truth, Richard Callow eliminated them. But now the question was, who had killed Callow? Who, after 32 years, had finally decided to take revenge? Columbo returned to Callow's villa. This time, he wanted to search more deeply. He asked permission from the new estate manager and nephew of Callow's, who had inherited the property, and spent the next hours exploring every room, every drawer, every closet. In the office, he found a safe hidden behind a painting. The manager didn't have the combination, so Columbo called in a professional locksmith. Inside the safe were financial documents, contracts, and an old metal box. Columbo opened the box carefully. Inside were several objects: a diary with a worn leather cover, a photograph of Sarah Monroe, magnificent young woman with wavy black hair and bright eyes, and a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. He opened the diary. The first page bore an inscription in delicate female handwriting: Diary of Sarah Elizabeth Monroe. If you are reading this, I am dead. Please tell my family that I love them. Columbo's heart tightened. He began to read. The entries told the story of a talented young actress newly arrived in Hollywood, full of dreams and hope. She had met the 4 musketeers at a party in August 1945. They had all been charming, all interested in her. Richard was the most charismatic, the natural leader. Tommy was the gentlest, the most romantic. James was the intellectual, the one who spoke of poetry and philosophy. Bobby was the funny one, the one who made her laugh. At first, Sarah had been flattered by their attention, but quickly things had taken a darker turn. The four men had become possessive, jealous of one another. They fought over her affection. Sarah tried to distance herself, but they wouldn't let her go. Then came the final entry, dated September 14th, 1945, the day before her death. I can't take it anymore. They've all gone mad. Richard said that if I didn't choose one of them, he would hurt me. I said I didn't want any of them, that I just wanted him to leave me alone. Richard became furious. He said I was theirs, that I belonged to them. The others tried to calm him down, but they wouldn't listen. Tomorrow night, they want to meet me at Point Doom to talk. I'm afraid I'm going to go, because I hope I can reason with them, make them understand that I just want my freedom. But if something happens to me, if I don't come back, then let it be known that it was them. Richard Callow, Thomas Brantford, James Whitmore, and Robert Chen. They are all responsible for what is going to happen. If I die, let this diary serve as testimony. Don't let them get away with this. Columbo gently closed the diary, his hands trembling slightly. That was the truth Richard Callow had kept secret for 32 years. Sarah Monroe hadn't jumped from that cliff. She had been killed, probably pushed by the four musketeers during that nighttime meeting. And then, to protect their secret, Richard had methodically killed his 3 accomplices when they began showing signs of wanting to confess. But the question remained, who had killed Richard? Who had found this diary and decided to take revenge after all these years? Columbo called Eleanor Hartley and asked her to come to the villa immediately. When she arrived an hour later, her face showed apprehension. Mrs. Wren, Hartley, I found something in Mr. Callow's safe, Sarah Monroe's diary. Did you know about it? Eleanor went white. The diary. My God. I thought he destroyed it years ago. So you knew it existed? Yes. Richard showed it to me once. A long time ago, in a moment of weakness. He told me what really happened that night on the cliff, how all 4 of them met Sarah. How they fought. He said he didn't want to kill her, that it was an accident, that she tried to run away from them and fell. But you didn't believe him. No, Sarah wouldn't have been close enough to the cliff's edge to fall by accident. Someone pushed her, probably Richard, in a rage when she refused to accept him. Columbo nodded. Mrs. Hartley, I have one last question for you. Where were you the day before last, between 4 and 5 in the afternoon? Eleanor looked at him, suddenly understanding where he was going. You think I killed Richard. You had access to his house. You knew his routine. You knew he'd be alone every Thursday afternoon. And you knew his secret for years. Maybe you finally decided it was time he paid for what he did. You're right about everything except one thing, Lieutenant. I didn't kill Richard Callow. Then where were you? I was at the Los Angeles Public Library. I volunteer there every Thursday afternoon. I'd done that for 15 years. You can check with the head librarian, Miss Anderson. She'll confirm I was there. Columbo checked. The alibi was solid. Eleanor hadn't killed Callow. But if it wasn't Eleanor, then who? Who else knew the secret? Who else had a reason to want Callow dead? And then Columbo remembered. Something Margaret Whitmore had said. Something about her life after James's death. She had remarried 5 years later, she said, to a good man. Columbo went back to Margaret. This time, he noticed something he had missed during his first visit. On the mantelpiece, next to James Whitmore's photo, there was a photo of Margaret's second husband. And in that photo, the man held a trophy from the International Poison and Toxin Society. Mrs. Whitmore, Columbo said softly. Your second husband, what was his full name? Margaret looked nervous. Robert Anderson. He was a chemistry professor at UCLA. Why? And he died 2 years ago, you said? Yes. Of cancer. Why all these questions? Mrs. Whitmore, did you have children with Mr. Anderson? A daughter, Sarah. We named her after a friend we lost. Columbo's heart jumped. Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, was that friend Sarah Monroe? Margaret closed her eyes. Yes. Sarah Monroe was my best friend back then. We came to Hollywood together, two girls from Indiana with big dreams. When she died, I was devastated. And then when I learned James was involved in her death, her voice broke. So your daughter Sarah Anderson knows the whole story? Yes. I told her everything when she was grown. She deserved to know why she carried that name. Where is your daughter now, Mrs. Whitmore? Margaret didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. She's at work, I suppose. She's a chemist, like her father. She works in a pharmaceutical laboratory. A chemist, Columbo repeated. Who would know exactly how to use poisons? Margaret looked up, tears running down her cheeks. Lieutenant Sarah is a good person. She would never. But Columbo saw the truth in Margaret's eyes. She knew. She knew what her daughter had done. And dear listeners, Columbo has finally discovered the identity of the murderer. A daughter named after a victim. A chemist who understands poisons. And a revenge waited for more than 30 years. But how will Columbo prove that Sarah Anderson killed Richard Callow? And what will happen when he confronts her with what he knows? Stay with us for the conclusion of this poignant investigation. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts on this tragic story of secret and vengeance. Sarah Anderson worked at the Sterling West Pharmaceutical Laboratory in downtown Los Angeles. Columbo went there accompanied by two uniformed officers, but he asked them to wait outside. He wanted to speak to Sarah alone. First, the receptionist directed him to the third-floor lab. Through the glass, Columbo could see a woman in her 30s wearing a white lab coat, bent over a microscope. She had brown hair tied back in a ponytail and wore safety goggles. Columbo knocked gently on the door. Sarah looked up and gestured for him to enter. Dr. Anderson, I'm Lieutenant Columbo, LAPD. I was wondering if I could speak to you for a few minutes. Sarah removed her safety goggles, revealing intelligent, wary blue eyes. About what, Lieutenant? About Richard Callow and about Sarah Monroe. Sarah's face remained impassive, but Columbo noticed her hands clenched slightly. I don't know any Richard Callow. No. Yet you met him 2 weeks ago. You went to his villa under a false pretext, probably pretending to be a journalist or a film historian interested in his career. He received you in his office. You talked about the past, the 1940s, his early films. I don't know what you're talking about. Dr. Anderson, let me tell you what I think happened. You spent years planning this. Your mother told you the story of Sarah Monroe, the woman whose name you carry. Your father, Professor Anderson, was an expert in toxins. He probably taught you a lot about poisons before he died, and you decided that Richard Callow had to pay for what he did. Sarah remained silent, but her face was pale. You went to see him 2 weeks ago, Columbo continued. You gained his trust. Maybe you told him you were writing a book about Hollywood's golden age and wanted to interview him. A man like Callow with his ego would have loved that. He probably even showed you his office, his trophies, his mementos. You can't prove anything, Sarah said softly. Maybe not yet, but let me continue. On that first visit, you memorized the layout of his house. You noticed he kept a costly bottle of cognac on his desk. You also learned his routine, that every Thursday afternoon he was alone in the house because the staff had the afternoon off. Columbo took out his notepad. The day before last, you returned to his villa. You knew he'd be alone. Maybe you called ahead to arrange a second interview. Callow suspected nothing. Why would he? You were just a pleasant young woman interested in his legacy. This is ridiculous, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. You arrived around 4. Callow welcomed you into his office. Maybe he offered cognac to celebrate your second meeting, or maybe you suggested a toast. Either way, you brought cyanide with you. Easy to obtain for a chemist working in a pharmaceutical lab. While his back was turned, maybe while he looked for something on his shelves, you poured the poison into his glass. Sarah closed her eyes. He drank. Cyanide works quickly. In a few minutes, he was dead. You could have left right away, but you didn't. You had something else to do. Columbo pulled the old photo of the Four Musketeers from his pocket. You took this photo out of the drawer of his desk and placed it in front of him. You wanted him to see it while he died. You wanted him to remember his victims: Sarah Monroe, Tommy Bradford, James Whitmore, Bobby Chen, all dead because of him. A tear slid down Sarah's cheek. He deserved it, she whispered. He deserved to die remembering what he did. Maybe, Columbo said softly. But it wasn't for you to decide. Why not? Sarah suddenly opened her eyes, shining with anger and grief. The police did nothing in 1945. They called Sarah Monroe's death a suicide and closed the case. No one investigated. No one cared about a young, insignificant actress who fell from a cliff. I understand your anger. You understand? Sarah laughed bitterly. How could you understand? Sarah Monroe was my mother's closest friend. They were like sisters. And 4 men killed her because she didn't want them, because she dared to say no. My mother lived with that pain and guilt her whole life. Guilt? Yes. Guilt because she introduced Sarah to James Whitmore. Because she thought she could have saved her friend if only she had known what was happening. That guilt poisoned her life, her marriage. My father was a good man, but she could never truly love him because part of her was always stuck in 1945, mourning her lost friend. So you decided to take revenge. I decided to do justice. There's a difference. Columbo sadly shook his head. No, Dr. Anderson. There's no difference. Murder is murder, no matter how you justify it. Callow killed 4 people. Sarah Monroe, then his own friends when they threatened to reveal the truth. He was a monster. I'm not saying he wasn't a terrible man, but you took the law into your own hands, and now you have to face the consequences. Sarah stayed silent for a long moment. Then she removed her lab coat and folded it neatly on a chair. You have evidence? Enough to get a search warrant. We'll find the cyanide in your lab or at your home. We'll find traces of your visit to Callow's villa. Maybe you left fingerprints somewhere. Maybe someone saw you enter or leave. Evidence is always there, Dr. Anderson. It's just waiting to be discovered. Sarah slowly nodded. I suppose I always knew this moment would come. When I put the poison in his glass, I knew I was destroying my own life at the same time. But it was worth it. For Sarah Monroe, for my mother, for all the women men like Callow have hurt and destroyed. Does your mother know what you did? No. She may suspect it, but we never spoke about it directly. I didn't want to involve her. Columbo signaled the officers to come in. Dr. Sarah Anderson, you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Callow. You have the right to remain silent. As Sarah was led away, she turned back toward Columbo. Lieutenant, one last thing. The diary. Sarah Monroe's diary. You found it? Yes. It was in Callow's safe. Please, give it to my mother. It's all that remains of her friend. She deserves to have it. I'll see what I can do, Columbo said softly. Sarah Anderson's trial attracted considerable media attention. The story of the Four Musketeers and Sarah Monroe captivated the public. It was a drama worthy of a Hollywood film. An old murder hidden for decades, a secret protected by other murders, and finally a revenge carried out by a daughter named after the original victim. Sarah's lawyers argued extreme provocation and emotional disturbance. They presented Sarah Monroe's diary as evidence that Richard Callow was indeed a murderer who had escaped justice for more than 30 years. They argued that Sarah Anderson had simply done what the justice system failed to do in 1945. The prosecutor, however, maintained that regardless of Callow's crimes, Sarah had no right to take justice into her own hands. Premeditated murder was still premeditated murder. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Finally, they returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder rather than first. recognizing mitigating circumstances but refusing to set her free entirely. Sarah Anderson was sentenced to 15 years in prison. With good behavior, she could be released in 10. Margaret Whitmore attended the trial every day, sitting quietly in the gallery, her face composed, but her eyes betraying her pain. Losing her daughter to prison was another tragedy in a life already filled with tragedy. After the verdict, Columbo visited her at home one last time. He brought her Sarah Monroe's diary, which the court had finally released as evidence no longer needed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Columbo said, handing her the precious diary. "I wish things could have gone differently." Margaret took the diary with trembling hands. "Thank you, Lieutenant, for everything, for finding the truth about Sarah, for being so kind to my daughter. My daughter made a terrible choice, but I understand why she did it. Sometimes the wounds of the past never heal. They just stay there, waiting for the right moment to reopen." "This whole story was meant to stay secret," Margaret said sadly. "That's what Richard believed all these years. But secrets have a way of coming out, don't they? Sooner or later, the truth always finds its way into the light." "Yes, ma'am. That's true." Margaret opened the diary and read the first page, the words written by her friend so many years ago. "Sarah was so full of life, so talented. She could have been a great star. Instead, 4 selfish, possessive men destroyed her future. And by doing so, they destroyed so many other lives too." "I know it doesn't change anything now," Columbo said, "but the file on Sarah Monroe's death has officially been reopened. She will be officially declared a victim of homicide rather than suicide. Her name will be cleared. That's something, I suppose." Margaret closed the diary and held it against her chest. "Thank you, Lieutenant Columbo. You are a good man." Walking back to his car, Columbo paused for a moment to look at Margaret's house. It was a pretty house in a pretty neighborhood. From the outside it looked so normal, so peaceful. No one would guess the tragedies that had unfolded in the lives of the people who had lived there. But it was often like that, Columbo thought. The greatest tragedies played out in private, behind closed doors and polite smiles, and only when something broke, when someone died or someone killed, did the truth finally come out. A few weeks later, Columbo received a letter from Sarah Anderson in prison. It was brief. "Dear Lieutenant Columbo, I wanted to thank you for treating my case with such compassion and understanding. I know I committed a terrible crime. I will spend the next years thinking about it and trying to find a way to live with what I've done. But I don't regret revealing the truth about what happened to Sarah Monroe. She deserved for her story to be told. She deserved justice to be done. Even if it came decades too late, I hope that one day, when I get out of prison, I can find a way to do something positive with the rest of my life. Maybe work with women who are victims of violence. Maybe help make sure other Sarah Monroes aren't forgotten or ignored. Thank you for being the kind of detective who cares about solving crimes, but also about understanding the people behind them. With gratitude, Dr. Sarah Anderson." Columbo folded the letter carefully and put it in his desk drawer. It was one of the saddest cases he had ever worked. There were no winners, here only victims, and more victims, stretching across more than 3 decades. Richard Callow had been a terrible man who killed to protect his secret and ultimately died for that same secret. Sarah Monroe had been an innocent young woman whose life was stolen. The 3 other musketeers had been accomplices who paid for their crime with their lives. Margaret Whitmore had lived in grief and guilt for more than 30 years, and now Sarah Anderson would spend the best years of her life in prison for seeking a justice that never should have been hers to administer. That night, Columbo went home to his small apartment. His wife, Mrs. Inisham, Columbo, had made his favorite dinner. They ate together in a comfortable silence. Then Columbo sat in his favorite chair and lit a cigar. "You look thoughtful, dear," Mrs. Columbo said. "The case is still bothering you." "Yeah," Columbo admitted. "It's just, sometimes I wonder. All these people, all these lives destroyed, and why?" "For a secret," Mrs. Columbo said. "A story that was supposed to stay secret. But secrets," Columbo said, They never really stay secret, you know. They always come out one way or another. You did your job, dear. You found the truth, I suppose. But the truth doesn't always make things better. Sometimes it just makes them sadder. Mrs. Columbo put a comforting hand on his shoulder. That's true, but it's still better to know the truth than to live in a lie. Sarah Monroe can rest in peace now. Her real story is known, and the people who hurt her faced justice even if it took more than 30 years. Columbo slowly nodded. You're right. As always. He drew on his cigar and looked out the window at the lights of Los Angeles glittering in the night. Somewhere out there, in that big city, there were probably other buried secrets, other stories that were meant to stay hidden. But sooner or later, they would surface too, because that was the nature of secrets. They could be buried, but they never really died. And as long as there were secrets, there would be a need for detectives like him to uncover them. And that, dear listeners, is how the story of the story that was meant to stay secret ends. Lieutenant Columbo has once again shown that his seemingly distracted manner hides a brilliant mind and unshakable determination. He solved a murder that hid another murder, that hid still more murders, all tied together by a secret more than 30 years old. Sarah Monroe finally got justice, even if it came decades too late. Richard Callard paid for his crimes, even though he escaped justice for most of his life. And Sarah Anderson, bearing the name of the original victim, sacrificed her own freedom to ensure the truth was finally revealed. It's a tragic story with no real winner. Only losses piled on losses. But it's also a story about the power of truth and how it refuses to stay buried forever. Thank you for spending this night with us in the universe of Lieutenant Columbo. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more classic detective stories to carry you towards sleep. Leave a like if you enjoyed this complex and moving investigation, and above all, leave us a comment. Tell us what you thought of this story. What detective or character would you like to hear in our next nighttime adventures? Your suggestions inspire us deeply. Now, close your eyes. Let your breathing slow. Think of Lieutenant Columbo going home after a long day. His rumpled raincoat hanging by the door, a half-smoked cigar in the ashtray. Think of him finding peace in his quiet home, knowing he did his job, that he found the truth, even if that truth was painful. Let that image carry you towards sleep. Dream of solved mysteries and truths that refuse to stay hidden. And remember, no matter how long a secret stays buried, the truth always has a way of rising to the surface. Good night, dear listeners. Sleep deeply and peacefully, and may your dreams be filled with justice, even if it comes late. Good night. Oh. 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 Oh.